It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. My first guest is John Hodgman. Look, you probably know who John is already. He's been a regular contributor to McSweeney's and This American Life, a bunch more. He is an actor who has worked on shows like 30 Rock, Flight of the Conchords, Adventure Time. Here at Maximum Fun, where we make this show, he is the judge on the Judge John Hodgman Podcast. John's written 4 books. His latest is Vacationland. It's kind of a departure for him. His previous work has been pretty much all jokes. I mean, funny jokes and, in a weird way, personal jokes, but nothing literally personal. I mean, stuff like, famously, an enormous list of hobo nicknames. I mean, his new book, Vacationland, is funny, but it's also very intimate. It's kind of a meditation about being a middle-aged man in America these days, about fatherhood and adolescence and how to accept that at some point in your life there's going to be more road behind you than ahead. John Hodgman is here with me now. John, welcome to Bullseye. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to finally meet you, Jesse.
We met on this show by telephone.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John Hodgman, and I'm sitting across from my friend Jesse Thorn, whom I was told in the year 2005 was a young woman living in Santa Cruz who would be calling me for a local radio show.
Yeah.
I was on tour for my first book in 2005, and I will not fault my book publicist for making an error of that kind. He had a lot on his plate.
When I interviewed you 12 years ago, it was on the occasion of the release of your first book. You were about to come to San Francisco, where I lived, on book tour.
Yes.
And I knew you as an occasional contributor to McSweeney's.
That's great. And
my wife and I, then girlfriend, went out to your book reading at a bookstore on Haight Street in San Francisco. And the audience of that book reading was composed, as I recall it, of several staff members of the bookstore.
That's true.
A strange man who
some of whom I think were called by the bookstore manager 30 minutes before saying, "We need bodies."
Yeah, a strange man who had been driving you around for the day to media appearances. Dave Eggers, the best-selling author Dave Eggers.
Yes, and one of my mentors and patrons.
Yeah. Dave Eggers' baby.
Mm-hmm. Also one of my mentors and patrons.
And myself and my wife.
Yes.
That was it. And you had brought with you your friend and mine, Jonathan Colton, the musician, now of NPR's Ask Me Another, who was dressed in a coonskin cap and shirt.
Yes.
A buckskin shirt and coonskin cap.
Yes. It was a moment of real existential crisis.
Really?
So the book, The Areas of My Expertise, and the 2 that followed it, I knew that they were weirdo books, written essentially for an audience of one, which was the weirdo 14-year-old that I was when I was 14, who had read the Laszlo letters by Don Novello, in which he wrote crank letters to major companies and printed the very serious replies, and also various books of trivia like Big Secrets by William Poundstone, in which was first revealed to me the secrets of Club 33, the secret and now not so secret restaurant in Disneyland, and all this sort of cryptic ephemera and weird trivia that I loved when I was a kid, plus play acting and comedy. And I wrapped it all up into this book of fake trivia called The Areas of My Expertise. And the conceit was, I had been asked to write a book of trivia, and I said to the editor, what if we write a book of where the trivia is all made up? So instead of the 9 U.S. presidents who, smoked more than 9 cigars a day or whatever, it would be the 9 U.S. presidents who had secret hooks for hands. And the editor said, I prefer my idea, and we hung up amicably, and I went out and sold the book to someone else. But I knew that the book began with rejection, and I knew that it might only reach a very small audience of like-minded strangers who would get it. But I also obviously hoped that it might reach a large audience because I wanted to continue writing these books, and I wanted to be able to feed my human child, of which I had one at that time. So facing down the audience in San Francisco, I felt like this may be it. Some bookstore weirdos, the young man who interviewed me for his interesting radio show, his wife, Dave Eggers, and a baby. That might be the audience that I'm going to reach. And I already knew that was a possibility, and this seemed an affirmation of it.
I mean, because you had, among other things in your career as a literary agent, part of your job was evaluating the commercial prospects of books.
Yes. Well, sure. That was, I wouldn't say that I was trained for that job, but it was in the description.
So you understood that part of the stakes of the situation were that you might write this weird book, and you were in a nice position to go on book tour and promote it, and
the publisher was very behind it for sure.
But if it didn't work, you knew what the stakes were.
Yeah, I knew that it was very possible that I wouldn't get to write another book, or at least another book of this kind. And at the time, I had a career, writing for magazines, regular journalism for magazines, which I enjoyed very much. But the whole point of writing the book was, having been a literary agent and having seen a lot of books come out, especially by my friends, some of which were successful, some of which were less successful, I was very resistant of the idea of writing a book just for the sake of writing a book. A lot of people, especially a lot of middle-aged dads, feel like now's the time to write that novel I always wanted to write, because it makes them feel complete and whole somehow to have written a book. And so even though I had been approached, and the reason that when I was approached about writing an actual trivia book, and I turned that down, a money offer was made, and I turned it down because I don't want to write a book just to have written a book or just for the sake of writing a book. I'm doing a job now, which is writing assignments and profiles and 750 essays about cheese for magazines. That's a fine job. But if I want to write a book, I want it to be a real expression of who I am, to the point that I can't not write it, that I can't help but inflict it upon humanity in a couple of 100 pages. And one would hope that it might resonate with other human beings, but ultimately that can't be the point of any book or any really meaningful piece of art that goes out there. So it wasn't just merely a question.
In this particular case,
yes,
when you say meaningful piece of art,
yes,
you're talking about a list of 700 names for hobos.
700 invented nicknames for hobos riding the rails in the 1930s.
Because one of the things about this book that you are currently describing in loving artistic terms is a very silly book.
Yeah.
But the odd kind of animating feature of this book and its sequels is how deeply personal the nonsense is. And it seems like that was one of the goals for you.
Yes.
Was to create the most nonsensy nonsense, such as a list of 700 names for hobos, that actually had personal emotional resonance for you.
For me, and perhaps me alone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Almost certainly you alone.
Well, no, I mean, no, it's true. There is a list of 700 hobo nicknames. And the only one I can ever remember is Giant Leathery Batwings Roland. Hobos of the 1930s had nicknames like Fry Pan Jack, right? Or Tennessee Ernie Ford, who sang hobo songs. Like, that was a kind of hobo nickname. And I remember the day, and it was in that same house in Western Massachusetts when I was writing my book. And I had a number of ideas, but then it just struck me I should do I don't remember. I was like, I should do a list of hobo nicknames, phony hobo nicknames. And and I should do a number of them, and that number emerged to me as 700. And then it became a challenge. And then it became a descent into a very painful mania. And then it was finally finished. The idea of it was that I would list 700 hobo nicknames, and that the list would take up a few pages and then continue to infect the rest of the book as a running sidebar, because it would be so long. And that it would be a visual joke, so that the reader would say, I can't believe he's still doing this. Like a different channel they could turn into and go, this is still going on. It was never meant to be read. It was a literary sight gag. But I also knew that I couldn't just repeat names or lorem ipsum it in any way. Like there had to be a unique, invented hobo nickname up to 700 for each slot in order for the joke to work. The joke had to demand sweat from me, mental sweat from me, and despair at certain points in order for it to seem properly deranged enough to include in the book, so that the reader wouldn't have to work at all and not read it. They would just have to dip in every now and then and goes, that's a different one, that's a different one, that's a different one. And I think to that degree, I love absurd humor, and I loved it then, but it had to serve something. And even though it's hard for me to express why, there were ideas that I had for the book. Like I wanted to tell a story about how the famous fake photograph of the Loch Ness Monster that everyone sees, it looks like a silhouette of a swan's head poking up over the water, that we all know that that's a hoax now. And I wanted to write a story explaining about, like, of course it's a hoax. We know that it's a hoax because the person who took the picture was the Loch Ness Monster. So there's no way he could have been in the picture. He or she, I should say. You know, that's a funny idea that you can play out into a comedic little story, and that's fine. But I always wanted it to be an honest expression of whatever was going on in me. And so, yes, there was no reason for a list of 700 hobo names other than it overtook my imagination and I had to do it. And therefore I inflicted it upon the world. And if the world of people for whom that would resonate included only you and only Dave Eggers and Dave Eggers' baby and a few other people in the audience, I can't say that it would have been, economically, that would be a disappointment to me. Artistically, I would be very happy. That was sort of exactly what I expected. So it was a confirmation of my expectation that what I'm doing may only reach a very small group of people, and I will always continue doing it, but I better keep a day job.
Was there a particular time that you decided that you were no longer going to be John Hodgman in quotation marks and were going to be John Hodgman, actual person, as a writer and performer?
Yeah, it was at breakfast with John Roderick at the Little Purity Diner in Park Slope in January of 2013. My last book of John Hodgman in quotation marks, That Is All, had been published in hardcover and paperback, and I had recorded a comedy show based on it for Netflix. And I felt that I had told certainly every fake fact that I knew how to tell. And for all of the archness and glibness of those books, I had poured a lot of the real me into it. I'd told every story that I felt like I knew how to tell. And I certainly couldn't go on the road telling any more Mayan apocalypse jokes because 2012 came and passed, and you may have noticed the world didn't end, and it was embarrassing for me. So I was out. I was just empty. And it was a different kind of but entwined sort of shock as the midlife moment of knowing that you're no longer becoming something, you're ending something. When you realize I don't know who or what I am anymore. I wouldn't even know what to write or to create. And maybe I should stop. But that wasn't an option for me because I didn't want to stop, and B, it was not the case that I was such a deranged millionaire that I could perhaps do the right thing for culture and disappear and let someone else have a chance. I had to sell something, and I had to discover if I had more to say. So I went into to Union Hall, a small performance space in Brooklyn, and set up a residency to just get up on stage once a week initially and just have an audience there that I would have to come up with stuff to say to. And while I did in those early shows, I mean, it's just panic is an incredibly powerful creative catalyst. And one of my other friends and mentors Kenny Shopson. And when I talked to him about my deadline for my book one time, he said, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. He said, your brain won't let you down. And it was an amazing thing to experience my brain not letting me down, that the refiner's fire of standing up in front of an audience, even though I believed that I had nothing to say, all of a sudden my brain started shoving stuff into the fire. And all of a sudden I had ideas. And they weren't ideas. They were what was left for me, which was just true stories about myself without quotation marks, about me as a weird middle-aged dad and husband and person.
What came out of your mouth that you didn't expect to come out of your mouth when you were required to go up on stage in front of 75 people who'd paid you once a week?
The one that broke the taboo was a story about my son getting bullied over the summer, one summer in Maine. For those of you who read my book, Vacationland, available now at all good booksellers, you will know that I spent sort of my 20s and 30s visiting a wilderness called Western Massachusetts. And now that I'm in my 40s, I've followed my wife to a wilderness of her choosing, which are the painful beaches of coastal Maine. And we brought our children with us because we're not horrible people. And we enrolled our daughter and son in a sailing and rowing camp that my wife had attended when she had gone there over several summers, and that she hated. And I guess it's our job as parents to visit the same trauma that we have endured, somehow to pass that along. So she enrolled them. And my son was having a terrible time because he was being bullied. Now, he was 8 years old, so I'm not talking about being shoved into lockers, but being laughed at and excluded and sort of just not welcomed, which is a horrible. As a parent, when your child is not happy, and your options are limited to do anything, it is a horrible feeling of powerlessness. And similar to how you feel when you are being bullied. I had this experience with my son, just, watching him endure day after day this emotional pain that we had caused for him, that he had never asked for. It's not like he was begging to go to rowing class at the yacht club at this place, and being responsible for it and not knowing how to counsel him for it, because not only have I always avoided conflict, but for some reason I never really was bullied even very much as a kid, even though I went to school with long hair and a black fedora and a Doctor Who scarf and a briefcase every day. I think I just presented too many targets for a bully to get a bead on.
Like a razzle-dazzle camo?
Yeah, exactly. And so, the few times I had been teased, it's not like I was going to get into a fight about it, so I just ignored it and pretended it wasn't happening, and then go home and watch a video cassette of The Prisoner or something. Patrick McGowan understands me, at least. That's not something you can say to an 8-year-old, and I really didn't know how to counsel him. And there was no way that he could not go, because you can't say to your children, it's okay to quit. I suppose if he were under actual physical harm, I would probably take him out of the yacht club and then burn it down. But this was just kind of run-of-the-mill, no feel-goods.
Right.
And it's hard to explain to an 8-year-old why you can't just let him quit the thing, because you don't want to explain to him, well, and then you're going to grow up, and if I give you permission to quit, you're going to grow up and you're going to start giving yourself permission to quit. And then you're going to be asking everyone you know to borrow money all the time or whatever. So I ended up saying to him, look, today I'd like you to wear this particular shirt, this T-shirt to rowing club. Do you remember what the shirt's from? And he said, yeah, it's from my birthday party at the indoor rock climbing place in Brooklyn. I said, right. And why did you get the shirt? He said, well, because I climbed to the top of the wall. And I said, did anyone else climb to the top of the wall? And he's like, no. And I said, before I say the next thing, you're 8 years old now. I know you know some curse words. Is it going to bother you if I say a curse word? And by the way, to everyone listening here, I ask you the same thing. I'll take your silence as affirmative consent that it is okay for me to proceed. And he said, no, Dad, it's okay, because he wanted to hear what I had to say. And I said, these kids all know each other because they've been coming here every year since they were born, and they don't know you at all. They don't know who you are or what you're capable of. That's why they're scared of you. That's why you need to remember that. And if they bring something to you today, if they laugh at you or if they push you in any way, emotionally or physically or whatever, if you want to say something to them, you can say that my name is name redacted Hodgman. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I climbed to the top of the wall when no one else could. You don't know me, so you can't give me any. And it was, as I said this to my son, I thought it was the greatest dadding I had ever done in my life. And by the way, Jesse, this was all off the cuff. I hadn't prepared this. This was all improv.
This is a classic example of your ability to hit the stage and come up with something.
That's exactly right. Great, America's greatest storyteller was born that day.
Uh-huh.
And my son, I watched my son's eyes brighten with confidence and a smile just to begin to creep on his face where I had not seen a smile for, a week and a half at all. Until the moment I said, and then all of a sudden his face turned gray and ashen. His features fell because I had broken the rules. Because even though he said it was okay for me to say a swear word, kids always say it's okay for their dads to do things because they love their dads. I was completely oblivious to the power dynamic that I was abusing in that moment. I bullied my son into saying yes to me saying a swear word. And when dad says a swear word in that context to his own son, then that's a breaking of the rules. And now it was as if my son's face looked as though like, now I don't know what could happen anymore. All the rules are off. Now I think those kids might kill me. All norms have been shattered. So that was a story that I told to a friend over lunch. And it never occurred to me in a million years that I would tell that story to anyone else. I felt it was too personal. I felt that I didn't love swearing on stage. That's the smallest of the objections to that story. I felt that it was too personal. I felt that it implicated my son in a way that I never liked implicating my children in my work. For complex reasons, I felt that weirdly it might be hurtful to the kids who bullied my son, and it was raw, and it was about my failing. And who cares, ultimately? That was the way I would protect myself from being vulnerable on stage, because no, everyone's got a dumb autobiography. Who cares? I told the story at lunch. I had the show that night. I went back to write the comedy for the show. I'm like, I can't just dress up like Ayn Rand again. I got to come up with something new to do. I had nothing. I got nothing. I'm like, oh, I could tell that story. And I told the story, and it went over well. And you know what? I'm lying to you now. I don't remember how it went. All I know is that it felt right when I was telling it on stage. And all I remember feeling is, this is what I've got now. This is what I've got. This is what I have to offer. This is the truest thing I have to offer. After 700 Hobo Nicknames, this is the truest expression of myself that I have. And that's my job, if I'm going to continue doing this, is to just be honest. But this time for real.
Well, John, thank you very much for coming back on Bullseye.
Thank you very much, Jesse. My friend, I'm not lying when I say I love you.
I love you too, friend.
Bye-bye.
John Hodgman, his book Vacationland is out now. Get it wherever you buy books. Also, if you haven't heard his podcast, Judge John Hodgman, please give it a listen. It's fantastic. I want to particularly highlight the performance of the bailiff, Jesse Thorn. If you want to hear more of our interview, we'll have a longer, almost unedited version of the conversation on the Judge John Hodgman podcast feed. It's live now. You can go take a listen.